Greetings everyone, this is Professor TJ Wilkins. This tutorial is Draping the Basic Skirt Part 2, Draping the Skirt. The items needed are muslin, a dress form, fabric marking pencil, fabric cutting scissors, measuring tape, dressmaker pins, a pin cushion or magnet. Let's start with the front. Pin the folded center front muslin edge down the dress form center front. Make sure to position the waist mark on the muslin underneath the waist band of the dress form. Place 2 pins at the waist to anchor the muslin in place. Pin the muslin's folded edge down the center front. Position the muslin so that the hip line is parallel to the ceiling or the floor. This line represents the side seam on the muslin. Align the side seam on the muslin onto the side seam of the dress form. Check to make sure that everything is aligned. Your hip is even. Okay, that looks good. Then pin from the hip down to the hem. Make sure that you're pinning on the side seam. This line that is 3/4 inches away from the side seam is for the waist. Align the 3/4 inch mark onto the waist at the side seam. Smooth the muslin along the side seam, smoothing from the front to the back, and then place a pin at the 3/4 mark exactly where the side seam meets the waistband. Smooth out the muslin and feel for the ridge on the dress form where the side seam is, and then pin on the side seam from the waist down to the hip. Check your work to see if everything is correct, that the center front is pinned onto the center front of the dress form, and that the hip is aligned. Okay, time for the darts. Use a pencil to mark the location of the princess seam right at the bottom of the waistband. Smooth the muslin from the center front to the side seam, locate the princess seam, and mark underneath the waistband. The extra fabric at the top is for the darts. Divide the excess fabric into 2 even parts. Temporarily place a pin in the middle to keep the fabric separated. Smooth the excess fabric out of the way. Crease the fabric to create a pleat with the dart line on the fold. Lay the folded pleat down towards the side seam and pin. Pin from the bottom of the waistband about 3 inches down towards the hip line. Measure 1 inch away from the first dart and mark. Okay, let's create the second dart. So as I'm creating this dart, notice that there's a lot of pulling from the side seam. To release the muslin, cut from the top of the muslin down to the top of the waistband. Do not go beyond the top of the waistband. This will help to release the fabric so that it's easier to create the dart. Crease the fabric to create a pleat so that the second dart line is at the top of the fold. Lay the fold down towards the side seam and pin to create the second dart. Pin from the bottom of the waistband about 3 inches down towards the hip line. All right, we're done with the darts. Notice that there's ease at the hip line. That's because 1/2 inch ease was added into the hip measurement when the muslin was prepared. Calculate about 1 inch away from the side seam and cut the excess fabric. Use the fabric pencil to mark underneath the waistband. Then mark at the side seam. It helps to feel for the ridge and then use that as a guide to mark the side seam. Stop at the hip. Draw a T-shaped line underneath the waistband to mark the darts. These marks represent the dart location and opening. So first draw a straight line across at the dart opening underneath the waistband and then draw a short straight line down to create a T shape. Guys, I was trying to be cute and not move the pins, but if the pins are in the way, feel free to move it. Just make sure to hold down the fold when you're marking the darts. Let's drape the back. This is the back muslin. Fold onto the side seam. And then at the dress form side seam, align the back hip line with the front hip line. Pin to anchor the muslin in place. Position the muslin so that the back hip is parallel to the ceiling or the floor, and then place the muslin folded center back onto the dress form center back and pin at the hip. Check your muslin to ensure that the back hip is aligned with the front hip. And then position the muslin center back fold onto the dress form center back line. And then pin from the bottom of the waistband down to the hem. Lay the back side seam fold line onto the dress form side seam. Start from the hip and work your way down to the hem. Check to ensure that the back muslin fold is exactly on the line drawn for the side seam. Check your work to ensure that the center back is aligned and that everything is even and correct. Place the 3/4 inch line onto the side seam at the waist. Pin under the waistband at the side seam. Smooth the back muslin along the dress form's side seam and pin. Pin from the bottom of the waistband down to the hip line. Make sure to feel for the side seam ridge along the way as you're pinning. Check your work to make sure that the hip is still aligned. And now let's do the back darts. Smooth the excess fabric away from the center back and then use a pencil to mark the princess seam. Mark underneath the waistband. Then distribute the excess fabric into 2 even parts. Temporarily place a pin to keep the folds separated. At the back princess seam, create a pleat with the dart mark at the top of the fold. Lay the pleat towards the side seam and pin 5 inches down, starting from the bottom of the waistband down towards the hip. At the waistline, measure 1 inch away from the first dart and mark. So I need to create the second dart, but notice that as I try to create the second dart, there's a lot of pulling at the side and extra, it's like a tightness. So to release the fabric, cut down from the top of the muslin down to the top of the waistband. Do not go past the waistband. This will help release the fabric to make it easier to create the second dart. For the second dart, create a pleat with the dart mark at the top of the fold. Lay the pleat towards the side seam. Smooth down and pin from the bottom of the waistband about 5 inches down towards the hip line. Yes! We're done with the back dart. So once you're finished, check your work to ensure that the darts are laid down correctly, they're parallel to each other, and that of course, that the hip is still aligned. Notice that there's extra fabric at the hip. That is because we added 1/2 inch ease at the hip. Okay, we're almost done. Check your work to ensure that the hip is aligned, that the front and back hip are aligned at the side seams, that the darts are parallel, and everything is aligned evenly. Use the pencil to mark underneath the waistband, starting from the side seam towards the center back. And then feel along the side seam and mark the side seam. Mark at the dart openings. Draw a T shape at the dart opening. So draw a line across and then draw a short line down on both darts. Here's a close-up version of the dart openings. The markings needs to be on both sides. Okay, we're done. Check your work to make sure that everything is aligned. All right, all right.